Monica adjusted the strap of her paramedic bag and pressed a hand to her lower back, feeling the dull ache that had become a constant in her life. The shift had been brutal, back-to-back calls, a 3-car pileup, and a diabetic emergency that had nearly turned disastrous. By the time she reached her apartment, the sun was already setting, casting a burnt orange glow over the parking lot. Jason was waiting by the door, still in his school clothes, a peanut butter smudge on his cheek. He beamed at her, holding up a drawing. "Mom. Look. It's a T-Rex, but he's wearing a firefighter's hat because he's a rescue dinosaur." She grinned, ruffling his dark curls. "I love it. We should frame this and put it in the Museum of Very Important Art." Jason nodded solemnly, clearly considering the prestige of such an institution. Then, without missing a beat, he grabbed her hand and tugged her inside. The apartment was small, too small, really, but it was home. The second-hand couch sagged in the middle, the kitchen cabinets were a little warped, but the walls were covered in Jason's artwork, and the space smelled like cinnamon from the candle she kept burning to make the place feel cozy. She had exactly 30 minutes before she needed to start dinner, and her body was begging her to collapse on the couch, but she didn't have that luxury. Jason climbed onto a stool at the counter, watching her as she moved around the kitchen, reheating last night's pasta. "How was work?" "Busy," she said, scooping the food onto plates. "Lots of people needing help today." He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Do you ever get scared?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at her son, his big, curious eyes watching her closely. He was only 6, but sometimes he asked questions that made him seem older, like he understood things in a way other kids his age didn't. She considered her answer carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But mostly, I just focus on what I need to do. That's how you get through scary things." Jason nodded as if she had just unlocked the secrets of the universe. Then, as quickly as the conversation had started, he launched into an elaborate explanation of a dinosaur migration theory he had learned about that day. Monica let herself relax, just for a moment, listening to his voice fill the tiny kitchen. These were the moments that made everything worth it, the exhaustion, the stress, the endless bills. No matter how hard life got, she had Jason. And that was enough. It was their weekend tradition, park day. One of the few constants in their ever-chaotic lives. No matter how tired she was, no matter how many things she had on her to-do list, she always made time for this. The park was their little escape from reality, where Jason could run free, and she could sit on a bench with a lukewarm coffee and pretend, just for a little while, that things weren't so hard. Jason ran ahead the moment they arrived, his soccer ball tucked under one arm, scanning the playground for kids to play with. Monica found her usual bench, stretching out her legs with a sigh. She took a sip of her coffee, watching Jason weave through the other kids, already deep in a game of tag. Her gaze wandered lazily across the park. Parents chatting, toddlers wobbling near the swings, the hum of laughter and conversation floating through the crisp afternoon air. And then, her eyes landed on a boy near the climbing structure. Her breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly like Jason. Same messy dark hair, same deep brown eyes, same dimpled chin. It was like seeing her son standing in two places at once, an impossible copy of him existing in a different life. Her grip tightened around her coffee cup as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. He wasn't wearing hand-me-down sneakers or a slightly oversized hoodie like Jason. His clothes were crisp, his sneakers spotless, his hair neatly combed as if someone had carefully styled it before letting him out of the house. Jason hadn't noticed him yet. He was too busy kicking his soccer ball around, laughing as another kid tried to steal it from him. But the other boy, he had noticed Jason. The boy stood still, his face frozen in an expression of pure confusion. And then, at the exact same moment, Jason looked up and saw him. The two boys stared at each other. Neither moved. Neither spoke. They just stood there, mirroring each other's expression, wide eyes, slightly parted lips, an unspoken question hanging between them. Monica's pulse thundered in her ears. A woman, likely the boy's nanny, stepped forward, touching his shoulder and saying something to him. He hesitated, his gaze flicking back to Jason before he turned and walked toward the parking lot. Monica's stomach clenched. She watched as the nanny opened the door of a sleek black car, ushering the boy inside. It was the kind of car that never sat parked outside her apartment complex, the kind that had chauffeurs and leather seats and tinted windows. Just before the door shut, the boy looked back. Straight at Jason. Jason took a step forward, as if he wanted to say something, but the car pulled away before he could. Monica's breath came fast, her thoughts racing. She didn't understand what had just happened, but something in her gut told her this wasn't just a coincidence. "Mom," Jason said quietly, his voice small in a way she wasn't used to. "Did you see that boy?" She forced herself to swallow past the lump in her throat. "Yeah, sweetheart. I saw him." Jason frowned, glancing back at the spot where the boy had stood just moments before. "He looked just like me." Monica felt her heart pounding. She crouched down in front of Jason, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know. But I don't know why." Jason tilted his head, considering that. Then, after a moment, he just nodded. "Okay." He ran off, kicking his soccer ball again, as if nothing had happened. But Monica couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. Monica lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The quiet hum of the city outside her window was usually comforting, but tonight, it only made her thoughts feel louder. Jason was curled up beside her, his small hand resting on her arm, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. She should have been exhausted. She had worked a double shift, barely eaten, and spent half the evening chasing Jason around the park. But her mind wouldn't let her rest. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was that other boy. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, its glow casting a dim light over the tiny bedroom. Jason's features looked soft and peaceful in the darkness, the same features that had been staring back at him earlier that day. It was impossible. It had to be. Except it wasn't. Carefully, she slid out of bed without waking him, wrapping herself in the oversized cardigan she kept draped over the chair. She moved to the closet, pushing aside a stack of folded blankets and pulling out the plastic storage bin where she kept Jason's baby documents. It had been years since she last looked at them, mostly because it hurt. She lifted the lid and sifted through the papers. Birth certificate, vaccination records, hospital bills. Then, at the bottom, the one thing she had never been able to throw away, the letter from the hospital. The one that told her her second baby had died. She had been alone when she got the news, sitting in a recovery bed, her body aching from labor, still expecting to hear the cries of two babies instead of one. A nurse she had never met before had come in with an unreadable expression and handed her a piece of paper. Complications. Weak heartbeat. Non-viable. The words blurred together, nothing making sense. She had felt numb for weeks, refusing to talk about it, refusing to ask questions. Now, she wanted answers. She pulled Jason's hospital records from the bin, flipping through the pages. The birth time, 2:36 a.m. And beneath it, the space where a second name should have been, but instead, just a brief note, deceased. She had never asked for more details. Maybe she had been too afraid. Maybe she had wanted to believe the doctors, the nurses, everyone who had told her there was nothing she could have done. But now, with that boy's face burned into her memory, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. She opened her laptop and typed the name of the hospital into the search bar, followed by birth records, January 24th. She didn't expect much. Hospitals weren't exactly known for giving out patient information. But sometimes, if you knew where to look, public records could tell you more than they were supposed to. She scrolled through a government database, eyes skimming over names she didn't recognize. It was mostly newborn announcements, basic information, names, weights, birth times. Then, one entry made her stop. A baby boy. Born on January 24th. At exactly 2:36 a.m. Her heart started pounding. The last name was different. The mother's name was blank. But everything else matched. She read it again, just to be sure she wasn't seeing things. Then she clicked to request a full record. A notification popped up, access restricted. Of course it was. She exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers against her temples. She had no way of knowing if this was anything more than a strange coincidence. But it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like something was wrong. She needed more information. The next morning, after dropping Jason off at school, she made her way to the hospital, gripping the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her steady. The last time she had been here, she had left with one baby instead of two. Inside, everything looked exactly the same: bright lights, clean floors, the faint smell of disinfectant. At the records desk, a woman with rectangular glasses glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Monica slid her ID across the counter. "I need a copy of my hospital records from January 24th, 6 years ago." The woman typed something into the system, then nodded. "You'll need to fill out a request form. Processing usually takes a few business days." "That's fine," Monica said, tapping her fingers against the counter. "Also, I was wondering, there was another baby born at the same time as my son. Would I be able to access any information about him?" The woman barely looked up. "I'm sorry, but patient confidentiality laws prevent us from releasing information about anyone other than yourself or your child." Monica had expected that answer, but it still frustrated her. "I don't need personal details," she tried again. "Just, was there another baby? One born at exactly 2:36 a.m.? The woman's expression didn't change. "I can't disclose that information." Monica clenched her jaw, swallowing her frustration. "Okay. Thanks anyway." She took the paperwork and left. The hospital wouldn't tell her anything. The database wouldn't let her access the records. But there was still one thing she could do. She could watch. She could wait. And she could see if that boy showed up at the park again. The next afternoon, she took Jason back to the playground. He ran ahead like always, his soccer ball tucked under one arm, his face bright with excitement. Monica scanned the crowd, her stomach tight with nerves. Then, she saw him. The same boy. The same face. This time, she didn't just watch him, she watched everything around him. The nanny stood a few feet away, checking her phone. Then, after a few minutes, a sleek black car pulled up near the curb. A man stepped out. Tall. Expensive suit. The kind of presence that turned heads without trying. The boy ran toward him. Monica barely heard the nanny speak, but she caught the name. Mr. Whitlow. Graham Whitlow. It only took a few seconds to memorize his face. The way he ruffled the boy's hair, the way he spoke with quiet authority, the way he moved with the certainty of a man who had never had to wonder where his next paycheck was coming from. Graham Whitlow. She had never heard the name before, but now she knew exactly where to find it. That night, after Jason had fallen asleep, she sat on her couch with her laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark living room. Graham Whitlow. CEO. Billionaire. Philanthropist. And the man raising the boy who looked exactly like her son. Graham Whitlow had built his empire on decisiveness. He made quick, calculated choices that left little room for doubt, and he had little patience for uncertainty. People either belonged in his world, or they didn't. There was no in-between. From the outside, his life appeared seamless: flawless business deals, an estate that could be mistaken for a historic landmark, and a son who, at 6 years old, was already fluent in French and preferred organic blueberries to candy. Behind closed doors, however, things were less tidy. Eli had never been an easy child, not in the way Graham had expected. There were tantrums that didn't fit the polished image of the Whitlow name, stubborn streaks that reminded Graham too much of himself. The boy asked endless questions, not the ones other kids his age asked. He wasn't interested in dinosaurs or superheroes, but deeper ones, questions Graham didn't always have the answers to. Why don't I look like you? Graham had been caught off guard the first time Eli had asked that, sitting at the breakfast table with his untouched plate of eggs and toast. What do you mean? Graham had replied, setting his coffee down. Eli had tilted his head, examining him. You have brown eyes. And straight hair. And your ears are different. Mine are like mommy's. But they're not like yours. Graham had swallowed down a sharp inhale, carefully keeping his expression neutral. You have my posture, he had said instead. And my stubbornness. That's more important than ears. Eli had accepted that answer for the moment, but Graham had known, even then, that the boy wasn't satisfied. He never thought much about the past. Veronica had been gone for nearly 3 years, and Graham had buried himself in work after her passing, allowing grief to settle in his life like an unwelcome guest he tolerated but never acknowledged. Veronica had wanted to be a mother more than anything. It had become an obsession, a fixation that had turned their home into a maze of doctor's appointments and hopeful whispers about the latest treatments. The miscarriages had nearly broken her, and when she had come to him one evening, her hands clutching a piece of paper, her eyes wild with relief, he had barely hesitated before agreeing to the adoption. She had told him the mother had died in childbirth, that the baby had no other family. It had been a perfect solution, an unspoken agreement that they would never mention the struggle that had come before it. Graham had never doubted her. Not once. He should have. It wasn't until a housekeeper called him on the intercom that afternoon that his neatly constructed world cracked, just slightly. Mr. Whitlow, there's a woman at the gate. Graham barely looked up from his paperwork. I have meetings all day. Tell her to leave a message with my assistant. She's refusing to leave, sir. That made him pause. He didn't get uninvited guests. His estate was secured like a fortress, and anyone who had business with him knew better than to show up without an appointment. Who is she? She says her name is Monica Gerber. The name meant nothing to him. He was about to dismiss it when the housekeeper added, She has a picture of your son, sir. Says it's urgent. Graham frowned, setting his pen down. My son? She insists she needs to speak with you. In person. A cold prickle of irritation climbed up his spine. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to exploit his wealth, to use his son's name as a way in. He had learned to expect it, fend it off before it could become a problem. I'll handle it. He made his way to the front of the estate, where the gatehouse had cameras positioned at every angle. Monica Gerber stood on the other side of the iron bars, a small woman in a faded blue jacket, gripping a photograph like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Graham had dealt with persistent reporters, disgruntled business rivals, even distant relatives of Veronica's who had resurfaced when they thought there was something to gain. But this was different. The way she held herself wasn't opportunistic. It was something else, something raw. He stepped outside, hands in his pockets, keeping a careful distance. You have 60 seconds to tell me why you're here before security escorts you off the property. Monica's jaw tightened. She held up the photograph. Look at this. Graham barely spared it a glance. Whatever you're trying to. Just look. The insistence in her voice made him pause. His gaze flickered downward. The picture was of a little boy, standing in front of a school building, grinning at the camera. A boy who looked exactly like Eli. His breath hitched, but his expression didn't falter. His control over his emotions was airtight. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but this isn't a scam. Her voice shook slightly, but there was no hesitation. She wasn't bluffing. That's my son, she said. And he looks exactly like yours. Graham didn't speak. He didn't blink. I gave birth to twins, Monica continued, gripping the fence like she might fall over if she let go. I was told one of them didn't survive. But I saw your son at the park. And now I need answers. He wanted to dismiss her. Wanted to tell security to handle it, to make her disappear. But something about the way she said it, the sheer desperation in her voice, stopped him. Eli had asked why he didn't look like him. Graham had ignored it. Now, the question was staring him in the face. I want a DNA test, Monica said. Graham exhaled slowly, measured. And if I refuse? She squared her shoulders. Then I'll find another way to prove it. There was no demand for money. No plea for anything other than the truth. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. He studied her for a long moment, then, against every instinct telling him to walk away, he said, "Fine." A muscle twitched in his jaw. But when the test proves you wrong, you'll walk away and never contact me again. Monica nodded. Deal. She didn't know it yet. But the test wasn't going to prove her wrong. The security guard was already reaching for her arm when Monica yanked herself free, gripping the metal bars of the gate like she could force them open with sheer determination. Let me go, she snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. The guard, a man with a broad chest and a humorless face, barely blinked. Mr. Whitlow doesn't take unannounced visitors. You need to leave. Monica's pulse was hammering so loudly in her ears that she barely heard him. She fumbled in her bag, hands shaking, and pulled out the picture of Jason, holding it up for everyone, to see. Look at him, she shouted, directing her words at the man standing a few feet away, watching her with a mix of irritation and indifference. Tell me that's not your son. Graham Whitlow didn't react right away. He stood there, poised and impassive, the kind of stillness that came from years of boardrooms and power moves, where emotion was a liability. He had clearly been seconds away from walking back into his house, from dismissing her as some crazy woman who had shown up at his gate. But then his gaze landed on the photograph. Something shifted. It was brief, nearly imperceptible, but Monica saw it. A hesitation, a flicker of something that didn't belong on the face of a man who was used to having all the answers. His eyes darted back to her, then to the picture again. Jason grinned up from the photo, his curly dark hair a little messy, his front tooth slightly crooked, the same way Eli's was. The same deep brown eyes. The same dimple in his left cheek. Graham exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. Let her go, he said finally. The guard hesitated, but at Graham's nod, he released her, stepping back but still watching her like she might throw herself over the gate. Monica didn't care. She pressed the picture forward. His name is Jason. He's 6 years old. He was born at St. Mark's Hospital at 2:36 a.m. Graham's expression remained unreadable. That's interesting, he said, his voice even, clipped. But not my problem. Yes, it is. Monica nearly shouted. Because your son, Eli, was born at the exact same time. They're twins. Graham let out a slow, deliberate breath, the kind that people took when they were actively deciding not to lose their temper. Let me make something very clear to you, he said, his voice low but razor sharp. I don't know what game you're playing, but my son was adopted legally. My late wife handled the arrangements, and I have no reason to believe there was anything questionable about it. Monica clenched her fists. And I was told my baby died, she said, her voice cracking. I have spent 6 years grieving a child I now think is alive. If you have even the smallest doubt. I don't. You should. She didn't back down. She had nothing left to lose. Graham glanced down at the photograph again, as if he didn't want to but couldn't help himself. The resemblance was impossible to ignore, but logic fought against what was right in front of him. What do you want? He asked, like he was tired of the conversation already. A DNA test, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. That's it. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. Just a test. His eyes narrowed. And when it proves you wrong? Monica lifted her chin. Then I'll walk away. It was a gamble. A massive, terrifying gamble. But Graham didn't know what she didn't feel it in his bones the way she did. Graham studied her for a long moment, weighing his options like this was a business deal instead of a matter of flesh and blood. Finally, he gave a slow nod. Fine, he said. We'll do a test. Relief flooded Monica so fast it nearly made her dizzy. But understand this, Graham continued. If this is some ploy, if you're wasting my time, I'll make sure you regret it. She didn't flinch. I'm not wrong. Graham didn't respond. He turned to the security guard and muttered something under his breath before heading back toward the house, already reaching for his phone. Monica stood there for a long moment, the cool metal of the gate pressing into her palms, her heart still thundering in her chest. She had done it. She had gotten through to him. And if she was right, her entire world was about to change. Graham sat in his office, staring at the sealed envelope on his desk. It was small, unimposing, just a simple white packet with a thin strip of adhesive keeping its contents hidden. And yet, it might as well have been a grenade. His assistant had placed it there a few minutes ago, muttering something about it being urgent, but Graham hadn't reached for it. He wasn't sure why. It was a ridiculous hesitation. He had agreed to the DNA test to prove Monica wrong, to put an end to whatever scheme she was trying to pull. He had even let her pick the lab to avoid any accusations of manipulation. The results were indisputable. They would confirm what he already knew: Eli was his son, the child Veronica had brought home, the boy he had raised since birth. And yet, as he sat there, the doubt that had started as a whisper was now a dull roar in his head. He exhaled sharply and tore open the envelope. A single page slid out. His eyes landed on the words printed in neat black ink. Probability of relationship, 99.99%. His breath stalled. His fingers tightened around the page as if that would change what was written on it. He scanned the numbers again, searching for an error, a miscalculation. But there was no mistake. Eli and Jason were genetically identical. Twins. Graham's stomach turned, something cold settling in his chest. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar sensation claw at his ribs. Veronica had lied to him. The realization hit him slowly, sinking in piece by piece like an anchor dragging against the ocean floor. He had trusted her, never questioned the adoption because why would he? He had been relieved when she told him she had found a baby, that they wouldn't have to keep trying, that their suffering was over. She had said the mother had died, that there was no family. She had assured him it was legal. But none of that had been true. He had been raising another woman's child. His jaw clenched as he picked up his phone and dialed a number. His lawyer answered on the second ring. Mr. Whitlow? I need you to pull every record from St. Mark's Hospital related to my son's adoption, Graham said, his voice clipped. Everything. And I want it done by the end of the day. There was a brief pause on the other end. I assume this is about. I don't pay you to assume, Graham cut in. Just do it. He hung up before the man could respond. There was a knock at the door. He didn't have to guess who it was. Monica stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her shoulders tense, her jaw set. She had been waiting for these results as anxiously as he had, but unlike him, she had known the truth before the paper had confirmed it. Her eyes landed on the document still clutched in his hand. You got the results. Graham exhaled through his nose. Yes. And? They're twins. Her breath hitched, but her expression remained firm. I want my son back. Graham let out a slow, measured breath. Eli is my son. Monica's face twisted. You've had him for 6 years because someone stole him from me. The words sliced through the air between them. Graham pushed himself up from his chair, his fingers pressing into the desk. You think I knew? His voice was calm, but there was an underlying sharpness to it. That I had any idea my wife was lying? Monica's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. Graham ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. I didn't take your son. I didn't even know you existed until a few days ago. Monica swallowed hard. But you know now. His jaw tightened. And what do you expect me to do about it? Give him back to me. That's not happening. Monica's nostrils flared. You have no right to keep him from me. Graham's expression remained unreadable. I have every legal right. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. So that's it? You found out the truth, and now you're just going to pretend it doesn't matter? It matters. His voice was quieter now, but no less firm. But Eli is my son. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know Jason. He has a life, a home. And none of that is his real life, Monica cut in. His real life was taken from him. I was supposed to raise him. I was supposed to be his mother. Graham's stomach twisted. He had never been an emotional man. He didn't entertain hypotheticals, didn't waste time thinking about what could have been. But the thought of giving Eli up, of letting him go to live a life that didn't include him, made something tighten in his chest in a way he hadn't expected. He is my son, he said again, but there was something in his voice that sounded less like a statement and more like a plea. Monica didn't look moved. He is my son, too, she said. And I have every right to fight for him. Graham's grip tightened on the DNA results. He wasn't going to let that happen. His voice was steady when he spoke again. Then I guess we're going to court. Eli had never questioned his life before. Things were the way they were, and that was that. His father, Graham Whitlow, made decisions quickly and efficiently, the kind of man who never lingered on uncertainty. And so Eli had learned to live by those same rules. Questions were answered swiftly, things were either right or wrong, and the world he existed in was structured, orderly. Then, suddenly, there was Jason. Jason, who looked exactly like him but somehow felt completely different. Jason, who laughed without hesitation, who spoke in bursts of excitement that made everything seem like an adventure. Jason, who had a mother who hugged him absent-mindedly while she stirred a pot of soup, who ruffled his hair as she walked past him, who spoke with warmth and ease in a way no one had ever spoken to Eli before. At first, it was overwhelming. Eli wasn't sure how to fit into this new, chaotic rhythm. He was used to quiet meals and polite conversations, used to speaking only when spoken to. Jason had no such rules. Jason asked questions constantly. Big ones. Small ones. Ones Eli had never thought to ask. Do you think if dinosaurs were still around, they'd have their own amusement parks? Eli had never considered dinosaurs at all, much less whether they'd enjoy roller coasters. Have you ever had a brain freeze so bad you thought your head was gonna explode? Eli had never even eaten ice cream fast enough to get a brain freeze. You don't have a favorite dinosaur? Jason had asked, genuinely horrified. How do you not have a favorite dinosaur? Eli had shrugged. No one had ever asked him before. Okay, Jason had declared. We'll fix that. And just like that, Eli had been swept up in Jason's world. The bond formed quickly. It was natural, effortless, the way two halves of the same whole always seemed to recognize each other, even after years of separation. They spent hours together, switching between Jason's apartment and Graham's sprawling estate. Eli learned how to climb trees in the park with Jason cheering him on from below. He discovered the joy of building pillow forts in Monica's tiny living room, where she let them eat grilled cheese sandwiches inside their makeshift castle. Monica watched carefully, half expecting their connection to falter under the weight of their differences. But it never did. If anything, it grew stronger. Eli was fascinated by Monica. She was unlike anyone in his world. She wasn't like the carefully trained nannies or the polite, distant house staff who had raised him with strict schedules and soft voices. She was different. She let him help in the kitchen, even when he spilled flour everywhere. She never scolded, just laughed and handed him a towel. She listened when he spoke, not just nodding absent-mindedly like so many adults did, but really listening. She asked him what he thought about things, books, foods, colors, whether socks should always match. She made space for him in a way that no one had before. Eli started noticing the differences between his two homes. At his father's house, everything was immaculate, vast, and expensive. His bedroom was perfectly decorated, the sheets on his bed always tucked in with military precision. The fridge was always stocked with the healthiest organic food, arranged in neat rows. Every hour of his day was planned, down to when he practiced piano and when he read before bed. At Monica's, there was none of that structure, but there was warmth. The apartment smelled like something always cooking: cinnamon, butter, garlic. There were drawings taped to the fridge, the couch cushions were never quite where they were supposed to be, and bedtime stories weren't scheduled. They just happened whenever Monica found a book she thought they'd like. Jason moved through his world with a lightness Eli had never known. He was happy. He was free. Eli started to wonder why his own house never felt like that. Graham watched it all unfold. He had told himself at first that his interest was necessary. He needed to ensure Monica wasn't manipulating Eli, wasn't trying to turn his son against him. But as the days passed, he realized his reasoning was weak. He wasn't watching because he didn't trust Monica. He was watching because something about all of it unsettled him. Graham had always believed he had done everything right for Eli. He had provided stability, security, the best education, a future most children could only dream of. He had raised him with discipline and care. That was what a good father did. And yet, as he watched his son climb trees, make messes, and fall asleep on Monica's couch, something cold settled in his chest. For the first time, he wondered if his version of best had been missing something all along. Eli and Jason were identical, yet their lives had been anything but. Eli had been given every luxury, every opportunity, while Jason had grown up in a world where nothing was guaranteed. And yet, there was something about Jason that Eli lacked, a lightness, an ease that came from a life built on love rather than control. Graham had never considered whether any of it was fair. He had never had to. But now, he wasn't sure he could ignore it. Eli had been to Monica's apartment before. He had sat on the well-worn couch, eaten at the little round kitchen table, listened to the faint hum of traffic outside the windows. But this time, he was paying attention. Graham had dropped him off earlier that afternoon, his expression unreadable, the car lingering at the curb for a moment before pulling away. Eli hadn't looked back. Instead, he had followed Jason up the stairs, past the door with the slightly chipped paint, and into a world that felt nothing like his own. The apartment was small, at least compared to what he was used to, but it was full. Not full of expensive furniture or giant paintings or the sort of things his father's house had, but full of life. The fridge was covered in Jason's drawings, curling at the edges from where the tape had started to peel. A shelf near the TV was stacked with books, some neatly lined up, others leaning against each other like they had been picked up and put down 100 times. The couch had an old knitted blanket tossed over the back, the kind that looked like it had been made by someone's grandmother. It wasn't perfect, but it felt warm in a way Eli didn't have words for. He followed Jason into his room, which wasn't much bigger than Eli's closet at home. There were action figures lined up on the dresser, an open book face down on the bed, and a collection of mismatched socks scattered near the hamper. It was messy but lived in. Jason flopped onto the bed like it was the best place in the world. "Wanna play video games?" he asked. Eli hesitated. His father didn't let him play video games often, something about them being a distraction. But Monica didn't seem to have the same rules. "Okay," Eli said. They played for nearly an hour, Jason shouting in frustration every time Eli won, claiming the game was rigged. Monica peeked in once, holding a laundry basket, and smiled at them before disappearing down the hall. Eventually, they got hungry, so they went to the kitchen, where Monica was already making dinner. Eli watched as she moved around the tiny space, flipping tortillas on a pan, grating cheese, pulling ingredients from the fridge. It was different from the quiet, meticulous way meals were prepared at his father's house, where a chef worked behind the scenes, and dinner appeared at the table like magic. Here, it was noisy and full of movement, with Jason sneaking bites of shredded cheese when Monica wasn't looking. "Eli, do you like quesadillas?" Monica asked. Eli hesitated. "I don't know." Jason looked horrified. "How do you not know?" Eli shrugged. "I've never had one." Monica blinked. "Well, that's a tragedy," she said, flipping a tortilla. "We're fixing that immediately." A few minutes later, a plate was placed in front of him, and Eli took a cautious bite. It was warm and cheesy, a little crispy at the edges. He chewed slowly. "Well?" Jason asked, waiting for judgment. Eli swallowed and nodded. "It's good." Jason grinned like he had personally invented quesadillas. They sat at the table, Monica in the seat next to them, asking questions about school, about their day, about whether they wanted ice cream for dessert. It wasn't anything special, and yet, it felt different. Eli liked the way Monica listened when Jason talked, nodding and making little comments like everything he said was important. He liked how she never rushed them, how she let them linger at the table, even after their plates were empty. He liked the way she ruffled Jason's hair and leaned over to nudge Eli's shoulder playfully, like he had always been part of this family. After dinner, they watched a movie, curled up on the couch under the knitted blanket. Monica sat between them, not scrolling on her phone or leaving the room like the nannies at his father's house always did, but actually watching, laughing at the funny parts, pretending to be scared at the jump scares. When it was time for bed, Jason dragged Eli back to his room, and they climbed into the bunk beds. Eli lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to Jason mumble something about dinosaurs. A few minutes later, Monica appeared in the doorway. "All right, you two, no staying up all night." Jason groaned. "We won't." Monica smirked. She stepped closer, tucking the blankets around Jason, pressing a quick kiss to his forehead. Then, to Eli's surprise, she did the same to him. "Good night, sweetheart," she said softly, smoothing his blanket the same way she had Jason's. Eli didn't move. Monica turned off the light, and the room sank into darkness. Eli lay there, staring up at the ceiling. His chest felt tight in a way he didn't understand. He thought of his own house. His quiet, perfect room. The way his father said goodnight from the doorway but never tucked him in. He thought about the way Monica had kissed his forehead, about how natural it had been, like she had done it 1,000 times. He thought about the fact that he didn't want to go home. Graham sat in his car outside the apartment, the engine running, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He had planned to pick Eli up earlier, but when he called, Monica had said the boys had fallen asleep. "I can wake him if you want," she had added, "but he looks pretty comfortable." And so Graham had stayed in the car, watching the light in the apartment flicker off, knowing Eli was asleep inside a home that wasn't his. Something about it gnawed at him. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Guilt. For 6 years, he had been convinced he was giving Eli the best life possible. And yet, his son had slipped so easily into Monica's world, had looked so happy in it, like he had always belonged there. Graham had built an empire on control. He had crafted his life with precision, made choices based on logic, not feeling. But this wasn't logical. This was something messier. He wasn't sure what to do with that. Graham sat at his desk, the weight of the file in front of him pressing into his chest like a concrete block. He had spent his entire career making decisions with ruthless efficiency, signing contracts worth millions without a second thought. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal. This was his life unraveling in real time. He had spent weeks waiting for answers, for his legal team to pull records from St. Mark's Hospital, for every shadowy corner of Veronica's past to be illuminated. And now, the answers were here. Sitting inside a manila folder, waiting for him to confront them. He stared at his late wife's name printed neatly across the top of the report, his fingers unmoving. Veronica Whitlow. A name he had once spoken with warmth, with love. A name that now felt foreign, like it belonged to someone he had never really known. He exhaled sharply and flipped the folder open. The first few pages were standard, hospital forms, procedural documents, the kind of bureaucratic clutter he had expected. But then, stapled near the back, there was something else. A scanned letter. A note from one of the hospital's former administrators. Graham leaned in, his eyes scanning the words, his stomach twisting tighter with each line. Veronica had bribed the staff. Not just any staff member, a nurse in the maternity ward, someone who had access to patient records, someone who had been willing to do what she asked in exchange for a large enough sum of money. She had arranged for Monica to be told her baby had died. The reality of it was so stark, so horrifying, that Graham had to read the sentence twice just to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. But there it was, black and white, undeniable. Veronica hadn't wanted to adopt a stranger's child. She hadn't wanted a long legal process or a complicated arrangement. She had wanted a baby that was truly hers. And she had taken one. His chest felt tight, like his lungs had forgotten how to expand. The deception had been simple, elegant in its cruelty. Monica had been in pain, exhausted from labor, vulnerable. A nurse had come into her room, holding a piece of paper with carefully worded medical jargon, had spoken in hushed, practiced tones, had convinced her that one of her newborns had simply been too weak to survive. Graham rubbed a hand down his face, his pulse pounding in his ears. Veronica had come home that night smiling, holding Eli in her arms, telling Graham that everything had gone exactly as planned. She had said the mother had died, that there had been no family left to claim the baby, that it was a seamless adoption. And he had believed her. He had held that baby, Monica's baby, and thought he was holding his own. He had rocked him to sleep, traced his tiny fingers, kissed his forehead, all while Monica had been grieving the son she thought she had lost. A sick feeling rolled through him, something close to nausea. He had unknowingly raised another woman's child under false pretenses. He pushed the file away like it had burned him, his hands shaking. His wife, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, had done this. The weight of it was suffocating. The worst part wasn't even the lie, it was the fact that he had never questioned it. That he had gone years without seeing what was right in front of him. That it had taken Monica showing up at his gate, desperate and furious, for him to realize the truth. He didn't know how long he sat there before he picked up his phone. His fingers hesitated over the screen, but he forced himself to dial. Monica answered on the third ring. "What?" she said, her voice sharp, wary. Graham opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He wasn't sure how to say it, how to begin to explain. So he just said the truth. It was Veronica. A beat of silence. Then, cautiously, "What do you mean?" Graham exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She paid the hospital to tell you that your baby had died." Another silence. A longer one. Then Monica's voice, small and raw. "No." Graham swallowed. "It's all in the report. The payments, the falsified records. Everything." A shaky breath on the other end of the line. "No," she said again, but this time, it wasn't denial, it was grief. Graham closed his eyes. "I need to see it," she whispered. "I'll send you everything." He heard her inhale sharply, then let it out in a slow, trembling exhale. When she spoke again, her voice was unsteady. "All these years," she said. "I mourned him. Her breath caught. I had a funeral, Graham. There's a headstone." His stomach clenched painfully. She had buried an empty grave. Graham opened his eyes and stared blankly at the wall, at the framed photographs of Eli that suddenly felt different now. Monica let out a shaky, bitter laugh. She must have thought she got away with it. She must have been so proud of herself. Graham flinched. He thought of Veronica's smile, of the way she had held Eli so fiercely, so possessively. He had loved her once. Fiercely. But that love had been built on a foundation that no longer existed. He gripped the phone tighter. "She wasn't who I thought she was," he admitted, his voice rough. Monica let out a breath. "Neither was my grief." And with that, the line went silent. Graham sat in his office, staring at the stack of legal documents in front of him. His lawyer had been talking for the past 10 minutes, outlining strategy, next steps, potential arguments they could use if this went to trial. Graham wasn't listening. He had built his career on strategic thinking, anticipating problems before they arose, ensuring that he was always in control. But no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the truth. His son had been stolen. Not by him, but by his wife, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had built a life with. And Monica, the woman sitting on the other side of this battle, was not the enemy. She was a mother who had been robbed of her child, a mother who had buried an empty grave, a mother who had every right to hate him for what his family had done. A fight would be the easiest thing in the world. Graham had the money, the legal team, the ability to draw this out for months, years even. But to what end? Eli and Jason were already inseparable, spending every moment they could together, two halves finally made whole. What kind of man would he be if he tore that apart just to say he had one? His lawyer cleared his throat, misreading Graham's silence as indecision. "We have a solid case. The adoption was legal, even if the circumstances were questionable. If we take this to court, we can." Graham held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "We're not fighting this." The lawyer hesitated. "I just want to be clear, you're saying you want to give up full custody?" "I'm saying I want to co-parent." A pause. "Sir, that's unconventional." Graham exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "So is raising another woman's child without knowing it." The lawyer pursed his lips, clearly wanting to argue, but Graham was already reaching for his phone. "Draft the paperwork. Make it clear that this is a shared agreement. No primary custody, no court battle. They both get to raise their son." The lawyer nodded, though his expression made it clear he thought this was a mistake. Graham didn't care. He dialed Monica's number. She didn't answer. Not surprising. He tried again a few hours later. This time, she picked up. Her voice was wary. "What do you want, Graham?" "I'm dropping the custody battle." A long pause. Then, carefully, "Why?" "Because I was wrong. Because you deserved better than what Veronica did to you. Because I saw Eli crawl into your lap last night and rest his head against your shoulder like he'd been doing it his whole life, and I knew I couldn't take that away from him." "Instead," he said, "because it's what's best for them." Another pause. Then, a quiet breath. "Okay." It wasn't trust. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. The transition wasn't easy. There were logistics to sort out, schedules, school arrangements, holidays. At first, Monica braced herself for Graham to take control, to lay down terms like a corporate merger. She expected him to push for stricter boundaries, to demand oversight, to remind her that he had more money, more resources, more ways to make this difficult if he wanted to. But he didn't. He didn't demand Jason come to his house half the time. He didn't insist on reworking the boys' lives to fit his own. He listened. She found herself sitting across from him in her tiny kitchen one evening, the boys sprawled out on the floor working on a puzzle, while she explained why she didn't want them living in two separate worlds. "They've already lost 6 years," she said, pushing her coffee mug between her hands. "I don't want them spending the next 6 feeling like they're being pulled in 2 directions." Graham watched her carefully. The walls between them were still there, but they were thinner now, almost translucent. "I understand," he said finally. And for once, she believed him. The first few weeks of co-parenting were an adjustment. Graham, used to structure, had to learn how to be flexible. He started dropping by more, staying longer when he brought Eli back from their days together. He drank coffee at her table while the boys played, listening as Monica talked about Jason's favorite books, the way he hated peas, how he sometimes had nightmares and needed to be comforted before he could go back to sleep. She noticed things, too. She noticed how Graham never raised his voice at the boys, how he had infinite patience when Eli asked 1,000 questions. She noticed how he started remembering little details, Jason's favorite cereal, the way Eli liked his sandwiches cut, the bedtime story they had been reading so he could pick up where they left off. She noticed the way his shoulders relaxed when he was in her home, how he lingered a little longer each time he dropped Eli off. Monica still didn't trust him entirely, and she wasn't sure she ever would. But there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where she saw glimpses of something unexpected. The way Graham knelt down to tie Eli's shoe without thinking. The way he carried both boys to bed when they fell asleep on the couch. The way he looked at them when he thought no one was watching, like he was still trying to wrap his mind around the fact that he almost lost this, that he almost let his own stubbornness get in the way of the most important thing in his life. An understanding was forming between them. They never talked about it. But it was there. Monica was still getting used to walking into a building like this, marble floors that echoed with every step, sleek glass walls, people in tailored suits moving with purpose. It was a different world from the one she had spent most of her life in, one filled with polished professionalism instead of ambulance sirens and emergency calls. She adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, still half expecting someone to stop her, to tell her she didn't belong. "Good morning, Ms. Gerber," the receptionist said with a polite nod. That part still threw her. She had spent so many years being just Monica. The exhausted single mom. The overworked paramedic. The woman who barely had time to breathe between shifts and school pickups. But now, thanks to Graham, she was something else. Director of Medical Operations. She still didn't know how he had convinced her to take the job. "I know you don't trust me yet," he had said months ago, sitting across from her in her tiny kitchen, stirring sugar into his coffee. "But I want to help." "I don't need charity," she had replied, arms crossed, already bristling. "This isn't charity," he had said simply. "You're overqualified for half the jobs you've applied to. And I have a company with a healthcare division that needs someone who understands medicine and logistics." She had fought it, of course. She didn't want to be indebted to him, didn't want to blur the lines between co-parenting and business. But the truth was, she had outgrown the chaos of emergency response years ago. And for the first time in a long time, someone was offering her a future instead of just a way to survive. So she had said yes. And now, she was here, walking through an office that was hers, managing a team of people who actually listened when she spoke. She was thriving. She had also gone back to school. Graham had nudged her toward it slowly, carefully, like he knew pushing too hard would make her dig in her heels. It started with an email, an application link sent with no context. Then, a few weeks later, an offhand comment. "You know, most companies pay for continued education. Something to think about." She ignored him at first. She was too old. Too busy. Too tired. But then she thought about Jason. About the way he looked at her like she could do anything. About how she wanted him to grow up knowing that dreams didn't have an expiration date. So she enrolled. She took classes at night, worked during the day, and somehow, through the exhaustion, she felt something she hadn't in years. Fulfilled. Jason and Eli were thriving too. 1 year had passed, and they were inseparable. They switched between houses seamlessly, 2 homes blending into one shared life. Jason's clothes ended up in Eli's drawers. Eli's books piled up on Monica's coffee table. They had their own world now, inside jokes, matching backpacks, a bond that had been stolen from them for too long. Graham had changed, too. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but at some point, he had stopped feeling like an opponent. He was still meticulous, still frustratingly precise, still incapable of letting an email go unanswered for more than an hour. But he was also softer. He picked the boys up from school sometimes, even when it wasn't technically his day, just because he liked watching their faces light up when they saw him. He called Monica about things that had nothing to do with schedules or logistics. Once, just to ask if she had watched a documentary he thought she might like. She had teased him relentlessly for that one. They weren't friends. Not exactly. But they were something. And it was enough. The weekend was warm, the kind of weather that made the park irresistible. The boys raced ahead, their laughter cutting through the quiet afternoon. Monica and Graham stood side by side, watching them. "They're going to break something one day," she said, shaking her head as Jason attempted to climb a tree while Eli cheered him on. "Probably," Graham agreed. "Hopefully not on my custody days." She laughed. For a moment, they stood there, watching their sons run, chase, live. Graham exhaled. "I was wrong about you." Monica looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "I know." He let out a breath of amusement. Then, quieter, "I'm glad you fought for him." Monica's throat tightened. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The boys ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the park. Graham and Monica watched from a distance, 2 people who had started as enemies, standing side by side. Maybe this had begun as a fight for custody. But it had become something much more.